Hi everybody, we know that fiscal policy is a major hot topic area for exams this year, but know that when essays on fiscal policy come up, they tend to be linked to major themes in the UK economy. So you need to be aware of what those themes are, you need to be confident using that context in your essays. You also need to know great stats linked to those themes to weigh up arguments in your essays. And that's exactly what this video is going to do for you. I've got a great video on UK economy stats for an overall background of how the UK economy is doing. I've got a video on supply side policy themes as well. I'm going to have a video coming out very soon on monetary policy themes. They're all going to be in my revision for 2025 exams playlist. So make sure you've watched the entire set. So no matter what the question is that comes up this year, you're ready to go with the context, with the stats, with everything you need to smash the essay. But here we go, let's get into it. Where are we at the moment with fiscal policy in the UK? Currently, the UK government is using contractionary fiscal policy, but to understand why, we need to go back to COVID times and understand the huge expansionary fiscal policy that was used then. Now, bear in mind, COVID was a horrible health crisis, yes, but in my view, it was an even worse economic crisis, resulting in the worst recession in the UK for over 300 years. And the way the UK government responded to that was with, yes, heavy expansionary fiscal policy in both ways. Huge increases in government spending, massive increases in healthcare spending. Naturally, it was a pandemic, but also massive increases in welfare spending. We had the furlough scheme as well. The government literally paying the wages of the employed and the self-employed. But at the same time, we saw dramatic tax cuts too, in particular targeted to industries that were hit hardest because of the pandemic. And because of these policies that were intended to boost AD, try and increase growth, try and close this huge negative output gap, try and get the UK economy recovering towards full employment, the end result though was that government finances were ruined. You could see the impact on our budget deficit. Remember what the budget deficit is? It's when government spending exceeds tax revenue in one fiscal year. And in the fiscal year 2020-2021, the real COVID fiscal year, the UK government ran an enormous budget deficit of 15.1% of GDP. That is £305 billion worth of UK government borrowing in that one fiscal year. That is absolutely crazy and unprecedented. The UK government has not run a budget deficit of this size since World War II. For even more context, the fiscal year prior, the budget deficit was only £40 billion, that much of borrowing in that fiscal year. So in the space of 1 year, essentially an 8-fold increase in borrowing is eye-watering and very scary. But maybe even more scary is that in the year since then, so this is now going all the way to 2025, you can see that budget deficits have remained stubbornly high. The UK's structural budget deficit is 2% of GDP. The structural budget deficit is the budget deficit being run when the economy is at full employment. So it shows you that even when the UK economy is doing as well as it can, the government is not earning enough tax revenue to fully cover its government spending. But in years since COVID, the budget deficit has been well above the structural level. So concerningly high budget deficits. But also look what COVID has done to our national debt. Prior to COVID, the national debt, which is the total stock of government debt over time, was around 80% of GDP, more like 78% of GDP prior to COVID. But as a result of this huge expansionary fiscal policy, that figure has gone up to around 96, 97% of GDP. As I'm talking now, it's 96% of GDP. So yeah, government finances in tatters because of what we had to do during COVID times. And as a result of this expansionary fiscal policy, we saw some of the intentions hold, but we also saw a lot of negatives. For example, now debt interest spending by the government is enormously high. In the last 3 years, debt interest spending has been well above £100 billion. The forecast this year is around £105 billion. Opportunity cost arguments are prevalent as a result of that. Also, these policies very much sow the seeds for very high, more than target inflation in the aftermath of COVID lockdowns, which then drove up wage growth and has created wage price spirals in the UK. But hey, despite government finances being ruined and despite inflation running very hot and well above target, we then had the infamous Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng mini budget. There was nothing mini about it. This was yet more very dramatic expansionary fiscal policy announcements in September 2022. Now, bear in mind, inflation back then was around 10%, and we had the negative impact of the COVID fiscal policies on government finances. Yet they went further with huge tax cuts, in particular income tax cuts, but at the same time, massive increases in government spending. The UK economy was in the midst of an energy price shock. So the big increase in government spending was to try and help households out in the midst of that shock. Now, none of these policies were funded. They casually left out that piece of information and the potential impact on inflation. And by not mentioning how these policies were going to be funded and the potential impact on government finances, literally, lenders to the UK government thought that these policies would bankrupt the UK government, so much so that there was then panic selling of bonds in the bond market, which drove down bond prices, which drove up bond interest rates very, very highly. Now, know that bond interest rates, when they change by a very, very small amount, normally over a long, drawn-out period of time. But as a result of these policies, bond interest rates went up by around 3 percentage points within a 5-day window. Just that increase in interest rates would have bankrupted the UK government. Incredible, right? It caused the Bank of England to then intervene to calm this market down. But also those panic selling of the pound. Massive capital flight from the UK economy, causing a crash in the value of the pound. There was economic turmoil in the UK as a result of the announcement of these policies. So unsurprisingly, both of these guys lost their jobs and these policies were then reversed. And ever since, we've been using contractionary fiscal policy. This started with Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister, but has very much continued under Keir Starmer as well. And the major branch of contractionary fiscal policy that the government is using is tax rises, and mainly direct tax rises. For example, income tax has increased, not explicitly, by stealth, with the Chancellor committed to freezing the income tax bands in our progressive income tax system all the way through to 2028. Now, how is that a tax rise? Well, think every year people's pay goes up, hopefully in line with inflation, in which case workers are not better off. Their pay is only going up by inflation. But if that pay rise now drags more workers into higher income tax bands that have been frozen, it means those workers might end up paying higher rates of income tax, which could actually make those workers worse off. So this policy is terrible news for workers. Millions more people are forecast to be now paying income tax or dragged into higher rates of income tax, dragged into higher income tax bands. But great news for the government, who can earn significantly more tax revenue this way. This policy alone is forecast to earn the UK government something like £45 billion a year by 2028. It's equivalent to a 7 percentage point rise in income tax. It's a massive tax rise. But no, that fiscal policy is devolved. So what that means is for Scotland, they have independence to use their own fiscal policy. And they took that power in December 2023 with an even more dramatic income tax rising budget. Know that the Scottish progressive income tax system is far more complex than the rest of the UK. Many more bands, many different rates. They pushed that up even further. They raised income tax for the highest earners from 47% to 48%. They introduced a brand new tax band targeting high income earners at 45%. And they froze all the other income tax bands in their progressive income tax system, promoting fiscal drag as well. So very, very heavy income tax rises for the UK, yes, but Scotland even more so. At the same time, corporation tax is increased from 19% to 25%. That happened in 2024. National insurance has increased as well. Know that national insurance is yet another income tax on top of traditional income tax, and is paid by both employees and employers. So it's the employer national insurance contributions that have increased as of the budget in October last year, very much burdening businesses there. But at the same time, windfall taxes on energy profits for energy manufacturers has been implemented, and we've seen an increase in council tax as well. So very much heavy tax rises, the major arm of contractionary fiscal policy. And even though we've seen a couple of tax cuts in recent years, for example, national insurance for employees has been cut initially from 12% to 10%, and then from 10% to 8%. Overall, the tax burden in the UK is the highest it's been since the late 1940s. Tax rises, the dominant arm here. But at the same time, no, that government spending has been squeezed as well in both actual and real terms and in current and capital areas. So in actual terms, we've seen cuts to welfare spending, cuts to development spending, cuts to certain departmental budgets for the government. In real terms, we've seen cuts to healthcare, education, public transport, local council budgets. Naturally, all of this is quite bad for aggregate demand, but it's also very bad for LRAS, isn't it? Hitting both actual and potential growth in terms of capital spending. Look what's happened to HS2. The northern leg of HS2 connecting Birmingham to Manchester has been completely scrapped on the grounds that it's simply unaffordable given the current state of government finances. So all of this, pretty clear contractionary fiscal policy. But why? Well, the main reason the UK government is doing this and is committed to doing this is to improve the state of government finances and to promote greater confidence in government finances, for the government to be seen as a less risky borrower, which can then mean that interest rates on government bonds can be set lower to reflect that lower risk, making it easier and cheaper for the government to borrow money over time and to fund whatever it wants to fund over time, to basically do the opposite of what happened during the Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng mini budget. And since these policies have been implemented, interest rates on government bonds have come down quite noticeably, despite the Bank of England raising their base rate of interest in the same time period. But at the same time, with lower budget deficits, with lower national debts, for the UK government to be operating within their fiscal rules means that there is flexibility, there is headroom, that's the term politicians tend to use, for then expansionary fiscal policy, either during our next economic crisis or for fiscal policy to be used for any intention in times of need. So that's a good argument as well. You know, improved government finances means there is expansionary fiscal policy flexibility. And at the same time, these are contractionary demand side policies that can help to tame inflation, especially demand pull inflation, if it's above target. But what are some major concerns? Well, as policies that harm AD, we can very much worry about the negative impact on economic growth, the potential for higher unemployment. That's very much what we've seen in the UK. We know we're in a stagnating economy with rising unemployment. These policies have very much had a part to play in that. You can worry about the impact on living standards. Of course, you're increasing taxation, in particular income taxation. You're cutting spending on benefits. You're cutting spending on health and education, local council budgets, public transport. Naturally, that's going to harm many people that rely on those public services. Not an ideal thing to do in the middle of a cost of living crisis. So nice argument there, as is worrying about Laffer disincentive effects. Given the nature of the tax rises we've seen, in particular the income tax rises, Laffer curve arguments are quite significant. When the Scottish budget in December 2023 was announced, these huge income tax rises, many economists came out and said, hey, Scottish government, be careful. Give it a year, give it 2, give it 3 years. You might actually see a fall in your income tax revenue because of these policies. They were talking exactly about the potential disincentive effects that these tax rises could have, and then the negative effects on tax revenue as a result. Pure Laffer curve disincentives there. Great argument given the context that we know. And lastly, of course, cut spending on benefits, raise income tax, in particular hitting those on lowest incomes the hardest. We can worry about the risk of rising income inequality. And in fact, since these policies have been used, there has been a noticeable increase in inequality reflected by a rise in the Gini coefficient from 0.34 around 2.5 years ago to, as we're talking now, 0.357, an increase in inequality. These policies, again, would be a driving factor behind that. So there you have it, guys. Fantastic to know fiscal policy themes linked to the UK like this. But make sure also that you've watched my video on supply side policy themes, you watch my UK stats video, and you watch my monetary policy themes when it's released very soon as well. Because we don't know exactly what the macro policy question is going to be this year, but we know it's going to be coming up. So being able to understand this context, use it in your essays, backed up with great stats, you're going to see those marks go up significantly. So thank you so much for watching this video, guys. Make sure you watch all those other videos in my revision for 2025 exams playlist, and I can't wait to see you in the next one on monetary policy. See you then, guys.